Welcome to Rooted in God's Love, the masterclass series for Christian women who desire to feel the Father's unconditional love, get grounded in their true identity in Him, and courageously live out their God-given purpose. I'm Alana and I'm your host, and I use biblical principles and cognitive behavioral therapy to help women get deeply rooted in their identity in Christ, heal old wounds from the past, learn to love who God created them to be, and wake up joyful every day living out their kingdom purpose. And today, I am so excited to introduce you to Roni Sasaki. Roni was born with only one leg. Her greatest struggle as a youngster was learning to love and accept herself for being different. Roni harbored a secret desire to become an Olympic athlete, and after various attempts at sports, became a one-legged skier on the US disabled ski team. In 1992, she won a gold medal and 2 bronze medals at the Paralympics held in Albertville, France. Sasaki is a dynamic and entertaining presenter. She has converted her experiences on the slopes to valuable tidbits of wisdom that inspire business professionals to embrace their unique differences and achieve their goals and dreams. Roni has successfully owned and operated Enviromet, an industrial supply company, since 1995. She recently published her first book, From the Start, Trusting God's Course for My Life. She's the host of the podcast, A Leg Up on Life, which is such a beautiful name. I love that. So welcome, Roni. I am so glad to have you here today.
Thank you. It's great to be here today. I'm very excited.
So today we're going to be talking about radical resilience, and you have a bit of an acronym RAD that we're going to unpack. And before we dive into this powerful topic, maybe you can tell us a little bit about your story, because I know it's such a powerful story of resilience. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about that to start off.
Yeah, well, I came up with this idea of radical resilience because I noticed that oftentimes when we're going through a challenging time or we encounter an obstacle, when we get through it and come out on the other side, we look back and we say, wow, that was an incredible experience, how everything just seemed to fall into place. And I can see how God was working throughout that. So I stopped and I thought, what if in the midst of it all, we stopped and we saw God working and realized it much sooner instead of going through till the end and then being able to look back. This whole idea of resilience is if you can picture a squeeze ball, a stress ball, when you squeeze it and it gets all unshaped and kind of gets lumps and everything. And then when you let go of it, it bounces back and it resumes its original shape. And we think of resilience as kind of resuming this shape. What if resilience was something that occurred during that misshapen piece? I like to see resilience as growing beautifully no matter where we are. And I have a picture to kind of illustrate this tree growing out of the rocks. And so when I talk about my story, I like to think of people always tell me I'm a hero because I have one leg. And I don't really think of myself as heroic at all. I just did what I had to do. In fact, one day this coworker of mine who is a Christian, he walked into my office and he came in and he says, Roni, I'm going to pray for you today. And I'm like, okay. He says, I'm going to pray for healing. And I'm looking up at him from my chair, like, healing, what do I need to be healed for? And he's kind of like, well, did I just grow a second head or something? Looking at me with this really confused, baffled look, like, well, your leg, of course. And I'm like, oh yeah, my leg. Because I was born with only one leg. When the doctors realized that my right leg was half the length of my left leg, they told my parents that your daughter would probably never walk. Now, that was a kind of a ridiculous thing to say because learning to walk was never one of my challenges. It was learning to love and accept myself because I learned to walk on my first prosthetic leg by the time I was 2 years old. And I remember praying as a kid because I knew I was different. And I don't want to imply that I had a difficult childhood by any means. My parents treated me really great. I did what all the other kids could do, even though I didn't do it quite as the same. I was on an artificial leg. I could run, even though I didn't run as fast. I got in trouble just like my brother did. I had chores to do. So I really had an incredible childhood, but I knew I was different. I hated being different. I wanted to be normal like all of the other kids. And at a very young age, at night, I would pray for healing. And I would cry out as a young kid would do and say, please, God, please fix my leg, fix my broken leg. Because in my mind, I was broken. That's what the other kids would always say. Oh, you have a broken leg. And so I wanted to be healed. And I would pray for this at night. And then I would lay there after crying out to God and think, okay, now, any second now, this supernatural thing is going to happen. And I lift up the covers and look down, and nothing happened. So I think to myself, okay, I'm going to pray a little harder. God just needs more time. Please, Jesus, please heal me. Fix my broken leg. Please, please, please. And then I would go to sleep. And I'd wake up in the morning and I would throw the covers off. And nothing happened. So here I had this coworker standing there telling me he wanted to pray for me. And I'm like, oh, yeah, I have one leg. And I stood out of my chair and I looked at him. And I said, you don't understand. I was healed a long time ago from my broken leg. And he couldn't quite understand that. But you see, healing doesn't always look like the way we think it should. Oftentimes it looks completely different.
Well,
And
and I think in your story, what's so interesting is that I think so many women can relate with their own struggle where they're lying in bed at night and they're praying for God to do something, to change something, to make something happen supernaturally. And in the morning they wake up and they're hoping, right? And then it's not happening, right? So I would think for you, I'm curious in those moments when you woke up in the morning and you saw that he hadn't healed your broken leg, what did you feel about God? Was there ever a question about who God was or his goodness or where he was or anything? Or did you always just keep believing that one day he was going to heal you?
yeah, actually, I often thought that I was cursed. I always believed God loved me. It's amazing. From a very young age, I became a Christian when I was only 7. And at a very young age, I knew that God loved me. But for some reason, I felt that perhaps I was being punished, or perhaps my parents had done something. It's where I come up with the R in the word RAD, which is the acronym I made up for this whole idea of radical resilience. And the R stands for re-story. It's making up a new story. Because I believed that God had cursed me. I was being punished out of all the kids in the world. Why was I the one that was doomed to have this one leg? I believed that somehow it was going to ruin my life. And I just didn't think it was fair. That was the story I made up. And we see a beautiful example of this whole idea of re-story in John 9:1-7. And I'll read that to you. Here, I put it up on the screen. And it's about the blind man. And Jesus comes along and he heals the blind man. It says, as he passed by, he saw, this is actually not 1-7, it's just the first couple verses. As he passed by, he saw a man blind from birth. And his disciples asked him, Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? And Jesus answered, it was not that this man sinned or his parents, but that the works of God might be displayed in him.
Amen.
So, I'm pretty sure when this child was born, especially during that period of time, and his parents realized that he was born, they probably thought that they were cursed. They may have thought that they had sinned, knowing the life that this child was going to lead, that someday his whole existence would be begging for his every care, his every bite of food, everything that he needed would come from this type of a life. And they had this entire story wrapped up around this idea that something was bad, something was wrong. And Jesus comes along and they want to know what happened, who did this? And Jesus, like, he was born blind so that the glory of God would be shown and displayed in him. So his whole existence was so that one day Jesus was going to come walking down the street, heal this man, and forevermore, for hundreds and thousands of years, we are going to read about this man in the Bible, which is, one of the most New York Times best-selling books of all time. His history goes on and on and on. And you have to ask yourself, would his parents have seen his life differently had they known that from the beginning? And
Yeah, well, that brings up an interesting point because, in that story, he would have had a chance to tell himself a new story. You got a chance to tell yourself a new story. But I love what you just shared about the parents, because a lot of times it comes from the parents, right? Like if we feed into our children the stories that they're going to believe. So if they
Yeah.
believe that they're good enough or not good enough, or if they believe there's a purpose to their lives or not a purpose to their lives, like we really feed into them that way, I think. So it sounds like for your situation, your parents were amazing at supporting you and loving you and showing you how beautiful and wonderful and lovable you were, and that might have set you up really well to actually have a better story. Like, I don't know, if did they share that story with you when you were young and say, look, like this is what's possible for you, this is what God's doing through you? Or did you not find out about that story until later on?
No, I didn't find out that story till much later on. I did find my own story before that one, actually, and that was in Psalms 139, 13 through 16. Now, my parents raised me in a Christian home, but they honestly struggled with my leg probably as much as I did, because they felt somewhat responsible because I was born with a birth defect. It's this thought of, oh my goodness, did I take something? Did I do something? Did I cause this in any way? How could we have done things differently so that our daughter would have been born normally? So I know that they struggled, and I wasn't born with an owner's manual, and they raised me pretty typically. I think they raised me really well. They certainly raised me to believe in God, which led me to this passage in the Bible that I discovered as a young teenager, as I was struggling to accept myself and kind of find really what God had for me. I remember crying at night, feeling sorry for myself as I was, 13 years old, in that kind of transition that we go through from childhood to teenagerhood. And we feel like all of our flaws are just totally magnified and on display. And I was feeling quite sorry for myself, truly wrapped up in the self-pity of thinking that this leg was going to ruin my life. And I remember having an experience with God as if he were in the room with me, and as if he was sitting on the bed, and I was crying again, as like I did when I was a kid, only I wasn't praying for healing anymore. I was just asking him why. And I remember thinking that he was saying to me, Roni, don't you know I created the way that you are for a reason, that I have a purpose for your life, and that I have a plan, but I want you to have one leg in order to fulfill the plan that I have for you. A little bit later on, I found the verse, Psalms 139, 13 through 16, which is pretty famous verse here. And I'll put it up on the screen as well.
Mhm.
And it goes like this: For you formed my inward parts. You wove me in my mother's womb. I will give thanks to you, for I'm fearfully and wonderfully made. Wonderful are your works, and my soul knows this very well. My frame was not hidden from you when I was made in secret and skillfully wrought in the depths of the earth. Your eyes have seen mine unformed substance, and in your book were written all the days that were ordained for me, when as yet there was not one of them. That was my restory for a couple of reasons.
Mm.
Now, instead of feeling like I was cursed, I felt like God was sitting up in heaven, and he's thinking about this life. And he wants to put a person in this whole plan that he has designed. And he thinks, now, who should I choose to live this life? Because I need somebody to have only one leg. And for some beautiful reason, he chose me. And so when he formed me into my mother's womb, he just left off half of my right leg. And then the other thing I like about this new re-story is when he talks about, you wove me in my mother's womb, because I love to picture a master craftsman, a weaver. And when you first look at the project, all you can see is these strands of fibers or yarn that just go this way, and it doesn't even look like much of anything. In fact, you might even say it looks kind of ugly. I mean, it doesn't. How can you even picture that as being art? Yet the master weaver begins to weave within those strands, one after the other, each color, each fiber, each texture. And the craftsman knows what the entire project is going to look like before it's even complete. And that's why he weaves in all the different beautiful colors and tapestry, that it becomes this work of art that is hung on the wall or used as a rug. And I picture God like that. And that became my new story. He chose me, and he is weaving my life in this beautiful piece of art.
I love that. I love that. And so Let me ask you a question, because you obviously, like, God's spirit is working through you. You shine his light and his love in such a beautiful way. And I think anyone watching would be able to experience that from you. And let's say there's a woman watching who is really struggling with that story. Like a lot of women, they haven't figured out how to tell themselves a new story, and a story that is based on biblical principles that they can come into agreement with. So, what would you say to the woman who's listening right now and going, wow, that's so amazing that she could do that? I wish I could do that for myself.
Yeah, we all have something different about ourselves that we would change if we could. For me, it might have been one leg, might be something else nowadays. I'm in my 50s. Boy, there's a lot of things I would change if I could. Um, I I believe in asking God and seeking what He has for us, and constantly be by looking around us. I think opening the door to a new story opens our eyes to possibilities. It's similar to the difference between using the word disabled versus the word adaptive. And A in RAD stands for adaptive. And nowadays, disabled has become one of those politically incorrect words, which I don't really care so much about the politically correct words versus the non-politically correct words. But I do like this substitution for the word disabled versus adaptive, because disabled implies something that is less than, something that is not possible, versus the word adaptive, which opens the door to any possibility. And when we begin to give ourselves a new story and look at life from being able to adapt, and we're seeking God and asking Him, it's amazing the doors that just seem to open for us. And I'm not saying it's easy. I'm not even saying it's fun. Now, there are seasons of life that are easy, and there are seasons of life that are certainly fun. But I think God didn't really call us to this idea of easy and fun, but He called us to a life of seeking Him and giving Him the glory, as we talked about with the blind man. And I think if we truly go to Him and seek that, He shows us.
Mm.
Sometimes it's in really small ways.
Yeah, I like that perspective shift in adaptive versus disabled, because I think one thing that does happen when we change our story through a place of faith and trust in his greater plan, right? And we say, okay, what might God have for us in this? We really do open up a world of possibilities. We open ourselves up to being creative, right? Like it's like a almost somebody who, for example, thinks that they're really stuck in this one place and they keep believing that they're stuck. Once they open up to something different and like, oh, maybe I'm not, maybe there's a possibility, maybe something could be different, then they start to find evidence for that. They start to create things in their life differently just based on their belief, because so much of our life is about our perception of our life, right? Perception of our circumstances. So that is beautiful. And I think that's something that the women who are watching, which I'm sure they're taking this in and like wanting to apply it to their lives. It's like just thinking outside the box. Like how could it be? What is a potential different story that I could tell myself that would bring me more joy and peace and could come from that place of believing that God is a good God, that He does love me, that I am fearfully and wonderfully made and knit together perfectly in my mother's womb, right? All of those stories. And our soul will often want to argue because our soul has, built up belief systems over the years, right? So for you, it sounds like you had an amazing setup in creating this new story, what it did for your life, and then it led you into this amazing place of being in the Olympics. Like, tell us a bit about that. How did that all come about?
Yeah, well, skiing is the most adaptive sport. So once we use the word adaptive, I love to talk about skiing because a person with a disability, just about any kind of disability, can find a way to adapt and ski. And that's what the beauty of it is. I wanted to learn to ski. I had tried sports my entire life. If there had been an award for the least likely person to be athletic in school, I think I would have gotten that award. So to have this dream of being an Olympic athlete was totally crazy and totally ridiculous. And one day, seemingly out of the blue, I just received a phone call from a woman whose name was Jan. And she says, Ronnie, would you like to learn how to ski? And she also had one leg, and she opened up my eyes to not just learning how to ski, but she invited me to my first race. And once I got the race bug, I knew that this was something that I really wanted to do. And skiing was always for me more than just a sport. I actually always considered skiing as a very worshipful experience because I could be out on the snow, outside, up on the mountain in a atmosphere and environment that maybe I wouldn't have been able to hike to on my own, but I could put a ski on and get on a chairlift and go out in the snow and in the woods and in the mountains and just totally bask in the glory of God in that environment. And then to ski down the hill and feel that freedom and the whoosh of the wind through my ears. I know this sounds kind of crazy, but for me it was a way of worshiping God, like a singer who's got a beautiful voice opens up their mouth and praises. Skiing was that to me. Um, and there was so many people that I met who had different disabilities. There were people with no legs. There were skiers with no arms, one arm. There was a lot of skiers like me with one leg. There were skiers who were paralyzed that skied in sit skis. Even blind skiers, if you can imagine skiing with a guide, someone who hollers out, turn left, turn right. I brought a couple pictures of myself skiing so you kind of get an idea of this adaptive skiing and what it looks like. I only used outriggers, which are like forearm crutches with ski tips on the end. There's one picture. And here's another one of going off of a jump in a downhill.
That's neat. So you had one ski on your leg, and then you had skis on your hand. Basically, you
Yeah,
carried skis as well, so you could turn.
short skis on the end of the poles, essentially. They're called outriggers. And that was the only adaptive equipment that I used. And they were used very similar to a pole plant. They gave an extra balance point for those of us who were on one leg. And
Amazing.
so skiing was just an incredibly adaptive sport. And the thing about it that's so beautiful is, had I planned it out, had it looked like I thought it should look to be an Olympic athlete, think about the thousands and thousands of young people who are vying for those positions on the Olympic team. I'll call them the normies or the non-disabled people. It's, only a very small percentage that ever actually make it because there's so many people that are out there competing for those positions. Now, I'm not saying that disabled athletes are not as elite. Certainly the level of athleticism required is every bit as high, every bit as strenuous as a non-disabled person. But the truth of the matter is there just aren't as many people out there that are competing for those positions. So it's kind of like becoming a big fish in a small pond. Because I had one leg, I was able to learn to ski at age 17 and rise up in the ranks very, very quickly and compete and ultimately become an Olympic or Paralympic athlete. I always say it didn't happen in spite of my leg. It happened because of it. It's as if God planted that dream in me. I had the one leg. I had everything necessary for this dream to become a reality. It didn't look like I thought it should. It looked better. It looked the way God had planned. And between the worshipfulness of the skiing and the gift that I felt he gave me, it was truly an honor. I felt to be chosen by God to be born with one leg.
That's amazing. That is so beautiful, and I love how you flip the script on your story. Instead of, a lot of people for various reasons feel sorry for themselves. They kind of go victim to the circumstance of, why did this happen to me? Why am I like this? This isn't fair. Which is fine, there's no judgment, but you've shown that there's a different way, a way that will open up a world of possibility that can really honor how God created you. And I love that. And so tell us a little bit about D,
Okay.
defiant, because I know that's the final in the RAD acronym. So tell us, what does that mean?
Yeah, I know. D does not mean go out and break the law. And during this pandemic, it doesn't mean try to sneak into Costco without your face mask. No, that's not at all what I mean. But D is as standing for defiant, is break the norm, do the unexpected. For example, as a child with a disability, nobody ever expected me to be athletic. I could have gotten out of PE class if I had a doctor's note, and I didn't want to. So defiant in that situation is to try to do the sports when nobody really expects it. Being a Christian is often standing up for what we believe when the world is going one way and we're going the other. Defiant is breaking that mold of what is expected.
Mm,
And I think that's really key to living this radical resilience life. If somebody is in a struggle, If somebody has suddenly this huge obstacle that drops in front of them and they have to figure out how to go over the top of it or go through it, or they're stuck on one side of it, it's easy for us to feel that pity for them, easy for us to understand why they're wallowing, if you will. Defiant in that case is saying, you know what, I'm going to be like that tree growing out of the rocks. That even in this situation where I'm not bouncing back like the squish ball, I'm still all squished up, that I am going to see God's plan in this. I'm going to trust him in this and know that I don't have to wait till like the other side to see the beauty, that I can see the beauty in the midst of it. And
Mhm.
that's my definition of this whole word defiant. There was a verse when I was ski racing that I didn't fully understand, and it was my hero verse. And you probably know what I'm going to say. Philippians 4:13. I can do all things through him who strengthens me. And I used to think this was like, oh yeah, God, I've got one leg and I can ski down a mountain and I can leap tall buildings in a single bound because you're so incredible, God, and you give me all this strength. What I didn't understand is if you go back a few verses and look at the context in which this verse was written, Paul, who was going through a lot of struggles, and in verse 4:11 through 12, he says, not that I am speaking of being in need, for I have learned in whatever situation I am in to be content. I know how to be brought low, and I know how to abound in any circumstances. I have learned the secret of facing plenty and hunger, abundance and need. Then he goes on to say, I can do all things through him who gives me strength. Because you see, it's that sweet spot of no matter where we're at in life, no matter what circumstances that we're going through, no matter what it is about ourselves that we wish we could change, that healing that we pray for that doesn't seem to come in the way that we think it should. Paul says, I can do all things through Christ who gives me strength. You see, it's knowing no matter where we are in life that we're where God wants us. It's that ability to trust him, that he gives us that strength to go through that, because we know that he is the master weaver. And this is one of the strands that he is putting into our beautiful tapestry.
Oh yeah. No, I love that. And it's so true. I think so there's this, I know I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. And we know that we have his spirit in us and we can be in that space of really living out through his spirit. But a lot of times we live out through kind of the metaphysical, like soul realm, right? And we focus on our beliefs and our thoughts. And when you said that whole idea around expectations, what came up for me is, who puts the expectations on us that we end up buying into, right? It's
Mhm.
the world, it's ourselves, it's people, right? And so what I love that you so beautifully said there is that God's expectations are different. Like anything is possible with God. We can do anything with his strength in us. Like that's the expectation we get to come into agreement with, instead of maybe what we've agreed with over the years about, well, I don't know if anything's possible. This is what the world says about me. This is what people say about me, right? And so I love that you explain that, because it's so true. When we focus on what God says, it really changes everything.
Yeah, there's a song that is, it's an old song, an old gospel song that Janet Paschal wrote, and I love the chorus. It has sort of become my theme in life, and it's, if I had my way, I might have been wading through the river when you wanted me to walk upon the sea. And if I had my say and all of my wants and whims and wishes, you knew how weak, how shallow I would be. I trust your wisdom over mine, because you've proven over time that in my narrow way of seeing things, I'd leave the best behind. I might not have stayed as close if I'd had my way. And
Mm,
I always want to be walking on I want to be walking on the sea, not wading through the river. And I
yeah.
think sometimes we when we don't fully trust God, we're wading through the river, and he wants us to walk upon the sea.
Well, and what comes to mind is the story about Peter walking on the water, right? And when he looked at the wind and the waves, he ended up sinking right into the
Yes.
sea. And then when he was looking at Jesus, he could walk on the water. And I think that's such a beautiful image for us is when we look to Christ, what is possible, right? Anything. And we can walk on the water, miracles can happen. And I mean, just like in your life. And what I think is so amazing about your story is just the simple and not simple, but simple, I will say, fact that you chose to agree that God is good. You chose to agree that he created you for a reason. He created you perfectly. And even though what you have is a situation where I think a lot of people would go, oh my gosh, if that was me, it would be so hard. And they might be going through their own stuff, but they haven't come to that point yet where they can go, you know what, God is good. It's okay that I went through these experiences. It's okay that he created me this way, and I'm going to choose a different story. And so, and I love that. And I kind of go back to the whole resilience piece. Like, how, for you, how has trusting God created more resilience in your life and ability to kind of be in the space that you're in now?
Well, it goes beyond my own understanding. I always like to believe that I'm in complete control of everything. I'm a control freak. And there are situations that I have no control over. And I get in those situations truly trusting that God has a plan and that he's in control. I don't know about you, but this entire pandemic has been one of those situations for me because I don't understand it. I certainly don't like it. And I have very strong opinions about many different things, as many of us do. And I look around me and I get frustrated with what I see going on. And I get to know and believe and trust that God is completely in control of the situation. And doing that, again, it doesn't necessarily make life easy. And sometimes things aren't always fun. And yet there's this total peace and a total surrender. I was going to use the word acceptance, but it's really not accepting it, because sometimes things they're difficult to accept, but surrender is not giving up. It's just laying it at his feet and knowing that he's got this. He's
Yeah.
got it.
Yeah. And almost like not wanting it to work out our way. Like when you talk about being a control freak, it's like a lot of times we want it to work out the way we want it. We have a vision. We really enjoy the vision that we have for our life, and that's the way we want it to go. So we're like, okay, God, like, we're good with you if this is how things turn out, and I'm going to help you, God, make sure that they turn out this
Yes.
way, instead of, like you said, laying it at his feet, surrendering to his plan, surrendering to his perfect, magnificent, greater plan for us, that a lot of times we're so scared to let go of that control and just let God be God. We want to be the gods of our own lives. And so I think that is so beautiful. And I think that's such a great testimony of what's possible when we are in that space of trust, like the resilience that's possible, the belief system that's possible, and really agreeing with the truth of who we are and who God is. And so if you're going to leave people with one final kind of piece of advice or actionable step or something that they could do, apply to their lives, Roni, what would that be?
I would suggest that don't settle for wading through the river. Trust God and know that he wants you to walk upon the sea. And that requires trusting him and surrendering to what is in your life, that and knowing that you are this beautiful tapestry that he is weaving day by day.
Beautiful words. I love that. That is so wonderful and such an encouragement to so many women. So I just want to thank you, Roni, so much for coming on today and just sharing your story, sharing how you've been able to overcome, and the story of going to the Olympics and just everything that God has opened up for you. And it's just so beautiful. And those of you tuning in, be sure to catch the next masterclass about being rooted in God's love. Thanks again. Thank you, Roni.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you for watching. If you connected with this content and it helped you in some way, please like, subscribe, and share this video. Also, check the description below for special gifts just for you. See you in the next video.